Studying Romerstadt as an example of a new town outside of Frankfurt, I realized how massive the problem of shortage of housing could get. The town was built after the First World War and aimed to accommodate minimum income groups. Facing such a problem, the state usually doesn't consider the individual needs and chooses mass production and prefabrication as a solution. At first, concrete prefabricated housing was used in Germany and France, and then the technology spread all over the world. I became interested in this topic because in my country, in Russia, shortage of housing was a critical issue as well. In 1930, Soviet engineers studied German experience of building social housing. Before the initiation of mass construction, people lived in barracks and dormitories, such as these ones, still preserved in Arkhangelsk. In 1952, almost 4 million people lived without electricity, sewerage, and central heating. The rest of the population lived a little better in densely populated communal apartments. In 1955, the mass construction of panel houses began. The whole country turned into one huge factory with an established mechanism. Concrete prefabricated blocks were symbols of rational future and gave people hope for a better life. Families received their tiny apartments in new buildings at the expense of the state. Many still remember this as a moving into a luxurious castle, since they no longer needed to huddle in a room with 20 neighbors. Construction was the main goal of every person in a socialist state. Everyone contributed with a workforce, films, and posters. However, we have come a long way since the beginning of 20th century, but these prefabricated five-story houses still reach 30% of the total number of apartment buildings. And if we consider all the series of panel houses, which are about 90 different types, the percentage increases to a number of 55. For decades, the state has changed the number of stories and sections, orientation and facing of buildings. But what remained unchanged was obtaining the minimum cost of a square meter at a high rate of construction, keeping the same apartment plans, style, and technology. Russia is located in three climatic zones: Arctic, subarctic, and temperate. In different climatic conditions, it is necessary to apply a different approach to construction, which is barely taken into account in Soviet buildings. Thus, in some regions of Russia, people continue to live in houses built in 50s and 60s, although the surface life of buildings was meant to be about 50 years. Authorities prefer to demolish houses one by one and move people from there instead of renovating them. The population doesn't have the option to keep the habitual place of residence in case of resettlement. Moreover, in most underfunded cities, this procedure is delayed for years, which leads to strong outflows of the population to the central district and formation of ghost towns, especially in places initially founded around factories and mines, which were later recognized as unprofitable. My project is based on the concept of renovation of panel houses. However, I wanted to adapt to particular regions and districts. While improving infrastructure, individual opinions must be taken into account. To make a socialist illusion of choice go into the past, we have to keep up with the times and experiment. What if we could take one district as a subject for private investigation and rebuild it from scratch with the use of materials available there? I took Petropavlovsk as a first example as it has a diversity of natural environment and experience a population outflow at the moment. A group of volunteers could oversee the redevelopment of the area from the very beginning. They would be given a choice of their preferred location, with different advantages such as proximity to workplace or to river and ocean shore. People could also choose from a row of public space options by voting with their future neighbors. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is a seismic activity region. Five-story buildings were reinforced with concrete monolithic structures there. However, there are other ways of seismic retrofit as an alternative, such as shear walls and cross-bracing, which could also embed public spaces into the building. My main intention is to come up with an alternative to a factory of faceless building production established in USSR. My own factory would ideally reveal the parts which people themselves changed in the buildings and their flats in order to adapt to circumstances and climatic conditions. I'd like to cover these points differently in a row of regions of Russia prior to the beginning of renovation. I decided to focus on one particular structure of five-story house in order to come up with the first design. My aim was to address the most common problems in the cities with decreasing population, where the circumstances allowed to make more interventions due to incomplete occupancy by residents. I intended to change the chaotic balconies look, lack of public space, a small layout of apartments, but in the same time to keep the position of the load-bearing walls. This is the timeline of the life of the building, starting with the opening in the 1950s, following its future deconstruction and renovation according to my design.